During a live studio session, Ibrahim Traoré stunned the audience when he dropped a bombshell revelation about the killer of Charlie Kirk. His words were so unexpected and powerful that the entire studio went silent in shock. What started as a calm discussion quickly escalated into one of the most explosive and emotional moments caught on camera this year. This video captures the raw reactions, the shocking details, and why everyone is still talking about Traoré's statement. The cameras were already rolling. Bright lights flooded the studio as Ibrahim Traoré, president of the transition of Burkina Faso, adjusted his microphone. The room was filled with journalists, students, and political analysts, all expecting a polite exchange about global leadership. But something felt heavy in the air. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing the tension. Just days earlier, America had been shaken by the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University. A 31-year-old father gone in an instant, leaving his wife and 2 children in heartbreak. Flags were lowered, vigils lit the night sky, and fear spread across the nation. Everyone was waiting for answers. The studio audience expected diplomacy, not confrontation. Yet, as Traoré's eyes narrowed, his voice dropped into a calm, unshakable tone. "There are truths," he began, "that cannot stay buried. And tonight, you will hear one." The crowd froze. Even the sound technicians stopped moving. What truth could he possibly mean? Nobody expected the name that was about to leave his lips. The silence was terrifying, and the world braced for words that would change everything. Across America, the murder of Charlie Kirk had already torn open wounds. Utah Valley University still smelled of candle wax from the vigils held by students who had gathered to mourn. Young people cried together in silence, holding posters of his speeches. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering, "If this can happen to him, it can happen to anyone." President Donald Trump had ordered flags lowered to half-mast nationwide. Churches rang bells, governors spoke of unity, and radio stations replayed Kirk's final speech from that very stage. The sound of his last words echoed in homes across the country. The investigation moved slowly and frustration boiled. News outlets debated theories, but no clear suspect had emerged. The killer's shadow loomed large, haunting the minds of millions. Into this storm walked Ibrahim Traoré. Unlike others, he did not come with speculation or political spin. He carried something heavier, a truth that he had held back for days. "Why him?" whispered a woman in the audience. "Why Kirk?" When Traoré leaned into the microphone, the weight of the entire world pressed down on the room. Everyone felt that something irreversible was about to unfold. The host, a well-known American journalist, tried to steer the conversation toward leadership and democracy. But Traoré's gaze stayed fixed, almost piercing through the camera lens into the living rooms of millions watching live. "I respected Charlie," he said softly, his accent carrying strength and pain. "But what the public does not yet know is that his death was not random. It was not a senseless act. It was planned." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One young man dropped his pen. Another woman covered her mouth, fighting back tears. The journalist's voice trembled. "Mr. President, are you saying you know something about the assassin?" Traoré did not flinch. "I am saying," he continued slowly, "that I have seen evidence with my own eyes, evidence that ties his murder to hands no one dares to suspect." The room spun into chaos. Reporters whispered. Cameramen zoomed in. Security shifted uneasily at the back of the hall. Yet Traoré remained still like a stone in a storm. Outside the studio, Americans clung to their televisions. For the first time, someone was breaking the wall of silence, and the world could feel the first crack. The journalist tried to regain control of the interview, but the tension was unbearable. A single cough in the back row echoed like thunder. Viewers watching at home described later that they could feel the air disappear from the room. "Mr. President, are you suggesting this was coordinated?" the journalist asked, her hand trembling slightly as she shuffled her notes. Tro leaned forward, his eyes calm but piercing. "Yes, coordinated," he replied. Charlie Kirk was silenced because of what he represented. His voice, his influence, his ability to stir the youth. Gasps rose from the audience. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others wiped their eyes. No one dared move. The lights above the stage seemed hotter, heavier. Suddenly, one of the camera operators lowered his lens and whispered, "This is history. This is not just an interview anymore." Even security guards looked unsure of what to do. Should they stop him? Should they let him continue? But Traoré spoke with the kind of certainty that made even skeptics pause. The truth was moving into the open, and there was no going back. At that very moment, across America, families sat glued to their televisions. Charlie's widow, holding their youngest child, stared in shock at Traoré's words. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered to the screen, "Please tell me who did this." For her, every headline had been an endless wound. Politicians spoke, but none gave answers. Analysts debated, but no one dared point fingers. Yet, here was a foreign leader standing under studio lights, breaking the silence. Treesa's voice softened, carrying both sorrow and fire. "I did not come here to point blame without cause. I came because I have seen documents spoken with sources and held in my hands the truth that others fear." The journalist's lips parted, but no words came. The crowd looked between him and the cameras as if expecting someone to cut the feed. But the broadcast continued live, unedited, raw. In that silence, the audience felt a mix of dread and hope. For the first time, someone powerful was daring to say what everyone else avoided, and hearts across the world beat faster, waiting for the name. The studio lights flickered for a moment as if the building itself trembled under the weight of what was about to be spoken. Tro lifted his head slowly, his voice steady. Charlie Kirk's assassin, he said, was not just a lone man with a gun. He was guided. He was funded. And the trail leads back to someone seated in power. The audience erupted. Some gasped loudly. Others whispered prayers. A man in the third row collapsed into his chair, clutching his chest. The journalist raised her hand, begging for calm, but no one could hear her over the growing noise. Traoré did not flinch. He placed both hands on the table before him. "This is not guesswork. This is not rumor. I have the proof." The broadcast cut to close-ups of people's faces. Eyes wide, hands shaking, lips trembling. At that moment, it wasn't just about Charlie Kirk anymore. It was about the safety of every voice, every activist, every truth-teller in the world. And the man who dared to say it was Ibrahim Traoré. A woman in the front row suddenly stood up, her voice cracking. "Who? Tell us who?" she cried, tears running down her cheeks. The security guards instinctively moved closer, unsure whether to silence her or let the moment unfold. Traoré raised his hand gently, signaling calm. His face held no anger, only grief. "I understand your pain," he said, looking directly at her. "The truth is heavy, but it is better than lies." The cameras zoomed in on the woman, her sobs echoing across the silent hall. Viewers at home later described it as the most heartbreaking moment of the broadcast, when one mother's desperate cry became the voice of an entire nation mourning. But Traoré was not finished. The assassin was not acting alone, he continued. Behind him was a machine, a network that thrives in the shadows, built to destroy voices that rise too high. The words pierced deeper than any accusation. It was no longer about one gunman. It was about something larger, darker, and more dangerous. The studio shook with whispers. Who funds this machine? Who protects it? The journalist leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. President, Are you saying you've seen this machine? Tro reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. The audience collectively held their breath. Slowly, he placed a folded document on the table. The cameras zoomed so close that the world could see the edges of official seals. I have these papers because someone risked everything to get them to me, he said. Inside are communications, names, and financial transfers. They show clearly who enabled the murder of Charlie Kirk. The room erupted in gasps again, but Trey raised his voice steady and calm. I cannot show them all here tonight, but I will not let this evidence die in darkness. People in the audience began crying openly. Some prayed under their breath. Others sat frozen, unable to move, knowing they were witnessing history. The journalist whispered, almost inaudible, "This changes everything." And it did, because for the first time, the proof wasn't just rumor. It was real. The studio, once buzzing with energy, turned into a suffocating silence. Even the sound of breathing seemed loud. Outside the building, crowds had already gathered, alerted by phones and social media. Sirens wailed in the distance as police cars lined the street. Inside, Traor's calm voice cut through the fear. Charlie's life was stolen to send a message. But I say today, the killers failed. His voice will not die, and neither will the truth. At that moment, the camera caught a close-up of his face. Steady, unblinking, fearless. It was a picture that would go viral worldwide within hours. The journalist sat frozen, gripping her pen so tightly it snapped in her hand. No one dared interrupt. Even the producers in the control room, usually quick to cut her censor, allowed the broadcast to continue because they too felt it. This wasn't a politician making noise. This was a man risking everything to tell the truth. The audience, though stunned, sensed the danger now reached beyond the studio walls. And in that suffocating silence, the weight of Traoré's courage became undeniable. By the next morning, every news outlet in America replayed the clip of Ibrahim Traoré's words. His face appeared on split screens across CNN, Fox News, and even small-town stations. Hashtags flooded social media. Traoré Truth and Who Killed Charlie trended worldwide. In living rooms, churches, and diners, people whispered about the mysterious machine he had exposed. Some praised him as courageous, while others feared he had placed himself in grave danger. At Utah Valley University, where Charlie Kirk had been shot just days earlier, students gathered again. They replayed Traoré's voice on their phones, listening to every word as if searching for hidden meaning. A group of young men bowed their heads in prayer, tears streaming down their faces. For Charlie's widow watching from her home, the words pierced even deeper. She clutched a framed photo of him and whispered, "Please let this be the truth. Don't let them silence it again." Meanwhile, in Washington, senior officials scrambled in private meetings. Some wanted to dismiss Traor's claims as reckless. Others admitted quietly that he might actually be holding evidence they couldn't ignore. The country was no longer just mourning. It was waiting for a name. Back in the studio, the tension hadn't faded. Even hours after the broadcast ended, reporters swarmed outside, shouting questions into microphones. Inside, producers argued whether airing the segment in full had been a mistake or the most important decision of their careers. The journalist who sat across from Traoré still hadn't recovered. She replayed the footage, staring at the moment when he laid the document on the table. It wasn't just words, she whispered to herself. He showed it. He actually showed it. Security doubled around Traoré. Whispers of threats began to circulate. A staffer admitted that phone calls from anonymous voices had already started, demanding the footage be removed. But it was too late. The clip had spread globally, impossible to erase. One technician, pale and shaken, muttered, "If he really has those names, then the ground just shifted under all of us." The truth was no longer hidden in dusty files or locked drawers. It was alive, pulsing in the open air, carried by the fearless words of a man who refused to bow. And with every passing hour, the pressure to reveal who grew heavier. That evening, under even brighter lights, Trey returned to the same chair in the studio. The journalist, still shaken but determined, asked directly, "Mr. President, the world is waiting. Can you give us one name?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Every viewer leaned forward. The control room held its breath. Finally, Trey spoke. "One name, yes, and this name will not surprise those who have followed the trail of money and power." He paused, scanning the room. The first man tied to Charlie Kirk's death is not a faceless stranger. He is someone whose signature approved the funds that armed the assassin. The audience froze, gripping their seats. Tro's voice deepened. "His name is written here." He tapped the folder with one hand. "I will not say it until I know his family is safe, and that no innocent blood will be shed because of this truth." The studio shook with emotion. Some cried, some shouted, some prayed, but all knew the storm had only just begun. The day after Tro hinted at the first name, Charlie Kirk's widow agreed to her first public statement. She stood on the porch of their home in Illinois, holding her 2 children close. Cameras flashed, but her voice was calm. "I watched President Traoré's words last night," she said softly, "and for the first time since my husband's murder, I felt a spark of hope." Her eyes glistened as she kissed her youngest child on the forehead. "I don't know what evidence he holds, but I know he speaks with courage. If there is a truth that explains why my husband was taken from us, I pray it is revealed." Her statement swept across the nation, striking hearts deeply. Millions who saw her grief believed even more strongly that Traoré was carrying something sacred. Back in the studio, producers wept as they replayed her words. One whispered, "This isn't politics anymore. This is about a family begging for closure." And with that, the pressure on Tro grew heavier than ever before. By Thursday, 4 days after Charlie's assassination, security warnings had intensified. Anonymous emails poured into the network threatening to shut down the broadcast if Tro continued speaking. Strange vehicles were spotted outside the hotel where his delegation stayed. But Tro remained calm. "If they threaten me," he told his aides, "it means they fear the truth. And if they fear it, we cannot stop." In private, the journalist admitted she was terrified. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," she whispered as she prepared for another live session. "We might not all walk away safe." Despite the danger, the studio filled once again. Ordinary Americans lined up outside, begging for seats, desperate to hear what Tro would reveal next. Inside, the atmosphere felt electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. One man in the back row whispered to his neighbor, "If he says a name tonight, history will change." And everyone knew time was running out for silence. That evening, the studio lights blazed hotter than ever. Traoré entered slowly, documents in hand, his face unshaken. The journalist leaned toward him and asked, "Mr. President, after the widow's plea, after the nation's demand, are you ready to give us the truth?" For a long moment, he said nothing. The audience sat frozen, hanging on his silence. Then he spoke. "I will not dishonor Charlie's memory by hiding what I know. The first name, the one whose hand approved the assassin's path, will be given tonight." The crowd erupted. Some cried, others clapped, some shouted in disbelief. Security guards braced as if expecting chaos. Traoré tapped the folder gently. "But understand this," he warned. "Revealing this name may shake the foundations of power. It may cost lives, yet it must be done." The camera zoomed closer, capturing every bead of sweat, every quiver in the audience's eyes. And just before he could open the folder, the studio lights flickered violently, throwing the room into half-darkness. Gasps filled the air. The breaking point had come. The flickering light steadied, and the silence in the studio grew unbearable. Traoré sat upright, his hands resting on the folder that seemed to burn with truth. "This name," he began, his voice low but clear, "belongs to a man who signed the very wires that delivered the assassin's funding. A man the public trusts." The audience leaned forward, breaths held. The journalist's pen trembled in her hand. Traoré opened the folder, slowly turning one page. His eyes scanned the words. Then he looked straight into the camera. "The first responsible name is Senator James Alder." A collective gasp filled the hall. Some screamed, others began to cry. Phones lit up instantly as the revelation shot across the internet. The journalist froze, stunned. "A sitting U.S. Senator?" she whispered, unable to finish. Traoré did not flinch. "Yes, and this is only the beginning." Kirk's assassination was not the act of one angry man, but the work of hands in suits and offices. The truth had been spoken, and the storm had finally broken loose. Within minutes, chaos erupted outside. Protesters filled the streets of Washington, New York, and Salt Lake City. Crowds chanted Kirk's name, holding candles and waving flags at half-mast. Others shouted angrily, demanding justice, demanding answers. News anchors' voices shook as they repeated the revelation. "Senator James Alder is directly implicated," one reported. "This claim, if proven true, will shake America's foundations." In Illinois, Charlie's widow fell to her knees, holding her children tightly as she wept. "Thank you," she whispered toward the screen. "Thank you, Traoré, for giving us a piece of the truth." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, crowds poured into the streets, cheering their president's courage. Mothers danced with tears in their eyes, proud that their leader had chosen honesty over safety. But not everyone celebrated. Inside Washington, corridors of power rattled. Emergency meetings were called. Some demanded Traoré retract his statement. Others feared his life was now in grave danger. And yet through it all, his calm presence on screen carried a single message. The truth could not be buried anymore. The final live session ended with the studio heavy in silence. Traoré rose from his chair, documents still in hand. He bowed his head briefly, then looked once more at the camera. Charlie Kirk's life was stolen, but his spirit will not be silenced, he said. To his wife, his children, and to every mother and father grieving tonight, I promise you, this truth will not die. The world must know, and justice will come. Tears streamed across faces in the audience. Some stood and clapped. Others simply wept, clutching one another as if holding on to hope itself. The clip spread faster than any broadcast in history. Within hours, millions had seen it, and by dawn, the story became the heartbeat of a nation. And though fear and chaos swirled, one thing was clear. Ibrahim Traoré had changed the conversation forever. Now to my dear viewers, if this story moved you, if it made your heart ache, if it brought tears to your eyes, if it made you feel the weight of truth and courage, then don't just watch in silence. Hit that like button to honor Charlie's memory. Subscribe so you never miss stories that shake the soul and reveal hidden truths. And most importantly, drop a comment below. Tell us how this moment touched you, what it made you feel, and why voices like Traoré must never be silenced. Your voice matters. Let it be heard.